Middlesbrough have got off to an electric start in the summer transfer window by bringing in two new signings already. Luke Ayling arrives at the club on a free transfer, having joined from Leeds United. He, of course, spent the second half of last season on loan from Leeds, and Middlesbrough moved quickly to turn that deal into a permanent one. Delano Bergzorg arrives on a permanent basis as well. He spent last season on loan with Huddersfield Town, but he's been brought in to add firepower to Michael Carrick's attacking line. Now, there's going to be a lot more first team players added to the squad. Hopefully there's going to be another handful of players joining before the end of the summer transfer window. But in order for that to happen, Middlesbrough are going to have to make some difficult decisions and move some players out of the club as well. A lot's been made of three of the star players: Rav Vandenberg, Hayden Hackney, and Emmanuel Latula, three of Middlesbrough's star players who are going to attract huge offers, big money for a club like Middlesbrough. And there's going to be some big decisions to make with regards to those three, but they're not the three players that I'm talking about today. Middlesbrough are also going to have to move on some of their players who could be deemed a surplus to requirements. The target this season is very much going to be about gearing up for promotion after missing out on the top six last season. There's going to have to be some big decisions made at the Riverside over the course of this summer, and that includes moving some of these players on in order to make room for the upgrades, for the new players who are going to come in and hopefully take the club to the next level. So who could be leaving Middlesbrough this summer? I've picked out three players who could leave the Riverside this summer in order to fund our future transfer dealings. The first player who could leave Middlesbrough this summer is Anthony Dijksteel. Now, this won't come as a surprise to Middlesbrough supporters. It's been reported everywhere that he's someone who could be heading out of the exit door at the Riverside. Now, Dijksteel arrived at the club from Charlton Athletic in the summer of 2019. This was when Neil Warnock was in charge, and that was really his best spell at the club under Neil Warnock. He was probably the only Middlesbrough manager that we've had in the years since who has really sort of backed Dijksteel and supported him as a key first team player. Since Warnock left, obviously we've had Chris Wilder and then we've had Michael Carrick. And Dijksteel's just really kind of struggled to nail down that starting spot. Under Michael Carrick, he's found it really difficult to establish himself as a first team player. I don't want to say that Michael Carrick doesn't trust him, but it also seems like he doesn't trust him in his starting 11. He has played a few times for the club under the watch of Michael Carrick, but he just really hasn't kind of impressed either defensively or in terms of his ball playing ability. Now, having arrived in 2019, Dijksteel has made 131 appearances for the club. He's been a solid signing for the club during these championship years, but I think for Middlesbrough, as they do look forward, and as they do look to strive to get into the playoffs and earn promotion and look towards the Premier League, I mean, Dijksteel's a player who likely will be allowed to move on this summer. Obviously, we've got Tommy Smith. He spent the last season out injured pretty much. He's expected to be back in time for pre-season. Middlesbrough also signed Luke Ayling over the course of this summer. He arrived from Leeds United, and he's a player of real quality, real leadership, and real pedigree as well. Someone who's been there and done it with Leeds United in the last few years. So you'd think that with those two options, right back should be just about covered. Now, should Middlesbrough endure another injury crisis like what we did last season? Obviously, we were absolutely spread completely thin last season, but we do have other players as well who can slot into that sort of right back role. Rav Vandenberg, although he's naturally a centre back, and hope will be that he can kick on and prove himself as one of the best centre backs in the league. He's someone who can slot in at right back should the need be there. Isaiah Jones as well. He's someone who, while he's not naturally a defender by any means, he has played as a sort of wing back a number of times for Middlesbrough. So that's something that Michael Carrick could consider as well. Should Ayling and Smith be ruled out, it might be that he could switch to a back five and have Jones as a right wing back with a little bit of cover from three centre halves behind him. So I think with those things considered, it means that for Dijksteel, there's just not really that much hope of playing regular first team football. He's not going to be playing at right back. He's certainly not going to be getting very many starts at all. Centre back is very much well stocked with Darrell Lenihan, Dale Fry, Matt Clark and Rav Vandenberg, as I've mentioned. We're looking really strong at centre-back as well. So it just kind of seems that Dijksteel is someone who, should he stay at the Riverside, is going to find first-team opportunities really, really difficult to come by. Dijksteel's a good player. He's a good championship-level player. I think there'll be a lot of interest in his services. And there'll be a lot of clubs who would consider him as a great summer signing. And I think that means that for all parties, he's probably someone that yeah, it's probably a deal that kind of makes sense. He deserves to go off and play elsewhere. He's 27 years of age now, so he's kind of in the prime years of his career. He doesn't want to be sitting on the bench at Middlesbrough or sitting in the reserves. He's better than that, and he deserves better than that as well. So I think it'd be really important for him to move on and reignite his career elsewhere. From Middlesbrough's point of view, Dijksteel has a year left on his contract at the Riverside. So from a business point of view, it makes no sense at all to leave him in the squad over the course of this season. He's not going to get offered a new contract, so that would mean that he would leave for free next summer. So if Middlesbrough can sell him this summer, recoup a bit of a transfer fee for him, it's not going to be any great shakes. No, maybe 500k, a million, something like that for him. Something that can go back into the coffers though and fund any other potential deals. It does really just seem like a transfer that would make sense for all parties, and Dijksteel is certainly one that I expect to move on over the course of this summer. Well, my third selection might surprise a few people. My second absolutely won't. The only surprise really is that he's still at the club. Matthew Hoppe is a player who I firmly expect to leave Middlesbrough over the course of this summer. Things just really haven't worked out for the American since he arrived at the Riverside. He joined the club in the summer of 2022. He was signed under the watch of Chris Wilder, and he kind of fitted into that mould of a development signing. It makes me shudder to even use that word, because obviously we had Marcus Force, who slotted into that category as well. And it was just a really kind of weird time before Kieran Scott properly took over the recruitment team. But I digress. It just really hasn't worked out for Matthew Hoppe since he joined the club. Since he came in, he spent time out on loan. In terms of his first team prospects at the club, it's just been really, really limited. He's made 6 appearances in total in 2 years for Middlesbrough. He hasn't started a single game. He hasn't scored a single goal. And in total, he's only made 64 minutes of first team football, which is quite astonishing, really, for a player who was brought in for, I don't know the exact transfer fee, but he was brought in for a good couple of million, and someone who was rated quite highly and someone who was expected to go on and do big things. That's been the case for a few years. Before he came to Middlesbrough, he'd spent time with Schalke in Germany. Tipped for real big things there. He moved to Mallorca in Spain for a fee of around 3.5 million and was expected to once again kick on and do big things there, but it just didn't really happen. He only spent a year in Mallorca before moving on to Middlesbrough. The hope was that Middlesbrough would be able to sort of polish this diamond a little bit and see him progress into a first team player. Someone who could really lead Middlesbrough's line and lead us, I guess, moving forward from a number 9's point of view. But it just hasn't happened for him. At no point has he even really looked like challenging for a first team role over the last couple of years. As far as I can remember, there hasn't really been a time when he's been in contention for a starting role or even been a kind of a key player in the match day squad. Go back to the year before, it was Cameron Archer and Chuba Akpom, and he just never really looked like getting a look in that season. Last season, even with the amount of injuries and that sort of thing we had, he never really got close to the first team. That's something that I can't see changing. I think going into the new season, we've obviously got Emmanuel Latte-Lath. We've got the new lad who's come in. We've got people like Marcus Force who we're going to be challenging up there. We've got Josh Coburn who'll be hoping to make a big impression. And I think for someone like Matthew Hoppe, it just seems like it's not going to work for him at Middlesbrough. He's a player of clear talent. It hasn't worked out for him at any of the clubs that he's been at over the last few years. But he is someone with real talent, and it seems like he needs to go somewhere, kind of find a home, and just really kind of kickstart his career, because he's clearly a talented lad. We've seen that because the sort and the caliber of clubs that have come in for him over these years have shown just how highly he's rated, but it just hasn't worked for him. As far as his time at Middlesbrough is concerned, he's got 2 years left in his contract at the club. So Middlesbrough are under no real pressure to sell him. But at the same time, they will be hoping to move him on, to see him reignite his career, but also to get his wages off the wage bill and free up space for another signing to come into the club. So I'd love to see Matthew Hoppe work out at Middlesbrough, but based on the last couple of years, I just can't see it happening. He didn't really get a look in under Chris Wilder in those first couple of months at the club. And then with Michael Carrick coming in, at no point does he look like threatening the first team. So he's clearly not a player who's fancied by Michael Carrick. And I think from Middlesbrough's point of view and for Hoppe's point of view, it's time for him to move on to reignite his career, because he's only 23, still a young lad. He's not expected to be the finished article just yet, but I think he needs to go somewhere, find a home and really kick on and show what he's about away from Middlesbrough. Hopefully, he'd prove Middlesbrough wrong and show that he is a quality player and that we've made a mistake. But as far as Middlesbrough's plans going into next season, we do need to be ruthless if we are going to be challenging for promotion. And Matthew Hoppe just does not fit into the plans as far as Middlesbrough are concerned. So I would not be surprised in the slightest to see him move on. Quite in contrast, if he was to stick around at Middlesbrough, I'd be absolutely shocked because I've seen nothing so far to suggest that he's capable of being a Middlesbrough player at first team level based on what we've seen over the last couple of years. The next player who I expect to leave Middlesbrough over the course of the summer is Dan Barlaser. Now, Dan Barlaser joined the club in January 2023. He was seen as a kind of an uncut diamond in quite a struggling Rotherham United team, but someone who could fit into Michael Carrick's team and ultimately take us to the next sort of level. Now, during his time at the club, he's done nothing drastically wrong. He's done fairly well. He's settled into Michael Carrick's team and been a fairly reliable player in the centre of midfield. I think there's an argument to say that when everyone's fit, he's not a first choice player. I think everyone would prefer Johnny Howson and Hayden Hackney to be the midfield pairing based on last season. I know there's been suggestions of Aidan Morris, the American, coming into the club this summer, and so he could disrupt that slightly. But he's been a trusted member of the midfield unit. He's played a number of games for Middlesbrough during that time. He has been reliable. He's made a lot of starts last season. He started more games than he didn't. And over the course of that campaign, when you look at the stats, he actually did quite well. You look at the numbers. He averaged 72.1 passes per 90 minutes, according to FotMob, which makes him the best passer at Middlesbrough in terms of pass completion rate. Overall, he's the third best player in Middlesbrough's team, according to FotMob, in terms that's taking into account passing statistics, tackling statistics, and all-round stats from his game. He's the third most effective player. He averaged 3.9 accurate long balls per game during that time, and he was second for chances created and expected assists for Middlesbrough last season as well. He was coming second to Finn Azaz, who was just brilliant during the second half of last season. So on paper, he's been a really good signing. He does really well, and I guess it depends how much weight you put behind those kind of statistics, because Michael Carrick might look at them and be like, he's exactly the sort of player that we want in midfield, someone who recycles possession, someone who plays the ball around and kind of dictates play from that kind of central area. But I think as far as supporters are concerned, there's a lot to be desired with Dan Barlaser. He's quite unspectacular in the centre of midfield. He's not, while he does play passes forward, he doesn't really seem to carve defences open all that often. I think as far as I'm concerned, I think Hackney is the more capable, advanced option in that central midfield area. And I think as far as he's concerned, he does often get caught on the ball. I think he's someone who Middlesbrough tend to play with two central midfielders. He's someone who could maybe slot in if they were playing three, maybe in the centre between someone like Johnny Howson and Hayden Hackney. But as a two, it does leave him a little bit exposed because he does sometimes take a little bit too long on the ball. Lacks that kind of like decisive element. And he's someone who technically is very good. He's a good passer of the ball and he's got good vision. Maybe just needs a little bit too long in order to pick out those passes, something which you don't get in the Championship, and particularly at the top end of the Championship when you are a club who are gunning for promotion. So he's someone who I expect to fall down the pecking order going into the new season. Now, there's been suggestions that Trabzonspor, the Turkish side, have come knocking for Dan Barlaser, and there's been suggestions that they've reported that they've lodged a bid for him in order to bring him to the club this summer. I'm not sure whether that's true, whether those reports have been verified anywhere. I haven't seen any of the lads at Teesside Live or the Northern Echo discussing them, but I think as far as it's concerned, it's possible that he could move on this summer. And I think just given his standing in the team, I think fans aren't entirely convinced. Michael Carrick does seem to really like him. But I think that there are better options in that central midfield area. As I mentioned, Howson and Hackney probably the starting two at the moment. Aidan Morris, should he come into the team, I think he'll be an automatic starter. You even have to look at some of the young lads who are coming through as well. People like Law McCabe, we saw him a handful of times last season, and he looks like a really talented young lad. So I guess it just depends how much faith Michael Carrick's going to put in him going into the new season. But should that happen, plausibly Dan Barlaser could drop down to fifth choice in central midfield. And I think for a club like Middlesbrough, it's not like the Premier League where there's endless pots of money and that sort of thing. All of these signings that Middlesbrough do make, it does cost us. And as a result of that, it means that Middlesbrough do have to balance the books from that point of view. That's in terms of wages and in terms of transfers as well. Now, Dan Barlaser kind of falls into that category of someone who is probably dispensable from the team, someone who I think, while Middlesbrough won't be actively looking to sell him this summer because he is a reliable member of the first team, he is someone who, should the price be right, should an offer come in that Middlesbrough deemed to be acceptable, I do think he's someone who could be moved on over the course of this summer. Obviously, he's only spent 18 months at the club, so it's not a huge amount of time. And I think ideally they would have wanted him to stick around for at least another season to supplement the squad and help us kick on in our hopes of challenging for promotion. But I think should an offer come in for him, an offer that's deemed acceptable, I do think that Dan Barlaser could be someone who's allowed to move on. But it would probably only be on the proviso that a central midfielder is signed. It is a position that Middlesbrough are looking to strengthen in. As I mentioned before, Aidan Morris is someone who's been heavily linked with the club and is widely expected that he'll join the club over the course of this summer. He would certainly be an upgrade on Dan Barlaser. And should that deal happen, it might well free up Dan Barlaser to move on. If that deal doesn't happen, Middlesbrough will still be looking for another central midfielder. And so it might be the case that Dan Barlaser's future is put on hold a little bit. It might be that a decision's not made until the back end of August, where Michael Carrick can take stock of his midfield options and decide whether he's willing to let him go. But yeah, certainly one to watch out for. Not a player that Middlesbrough are going to be actively looking to sell this summer, but someone who I personally think could and should be moved on if the price is right, because I do think we've got better options there. And anyone who's watched my videos before knows that I'm a big advocate of developing young players. And I think for someone like Law McCabe, I think he's someone who really should have the trust of the manager. Someone who could really benefit from being a much more active first team player at the club. I'm not saying he needs to start every week, but even playing 20, 25 games off the bench, something like that would be a real plus for him in terms of his development, just getting up to speed in the championship and being able to kick on from that. I think Dan Barlaser is someone who would potentially stand in the way of that happening for him. And like I said, if a transfer fee does come in that's deemed to be acceptable, I think he is someone who could move on over the course of this summer and before the start of the new campaign. So that's what I think. They're the three players that I expect Middlesbrough to move on this summer. But who do you want to leave? Drop into the comments below. Let me know the players that you could see Middlesbrough selling this summer. Which players do you think are going to attract interest, and who do you think Middlesbrough are going to be vulnerable to losing over the course of this summer? Drop into the comments, let me know. And if you have enjoyed this video, please do hit like. Please do hit subscribe, because there's going to be plenty more content coming in the coming weeks and months to do with Middlesbrough, but to do with the wider EFL as well. And your support is very much appreciated. So let me know what you think, and I'll catch up with you next time.